Greetings moviegoers and welcome back to another traditional summer movie recap. For those new to the channel, this is where I get to share with all of you every single movie I got the chance to see this summer. For this year, instead of ranking them all in alphabetical order, I've decided to put them all in separate interesting categories that I think y'all might like, and then cap things off with my top 5 picks for the best and worst films of the summer. But before we begin, I do have to point out that movies like Baby Driver and Atomic Blonde will not be featured in this particular recount due to the fact that I saw them months prior at South by Southwest. If you have any questions regarding those films, please feel free to leave a comment under my very brief South by Southwest summation, which I'll leave a link towards in both the description box below and at the very end of this video. With that said, let's look at our first category, what's streaming. This is where we get to look over the films I got to see through the comfort of my own home. Unfortunately, our first film brought me anything but comfort and led to me regretting renting it from iTunes, The Bad Batch, which seemed like it would cater towards those in need of a good Mad Max fix, but instead leaves you with an experience just as barren and empty as the wasteland itself. Oh, by the way, that's Jim Carrey. There. Just saved you 2 hours of complete boredom.
Alrighty then.
Thankfully, there was a better crop of films to be found on Netflix, like the documentary thriller Icarus, about the intricately frightening ways that Russia rigged the Olympics, Bong Joon-ho's magnificently weird Okja, that's filled with all sorts of things the entire family can enjoy, like violence, bad language, and animal cruelty. Did I read that right? We also have the teenage anorexia drama To the Bone, featuring strong performances from both Lily Collins and Keanu Reeves, the darkly comedic War Machine, where Brad Pitt takes his Lieutenant Aldo Raine persona to even greater and ridiculous new heights, and lastly, the sci-fi thriller What Happened to Monday, starring Noomi Rapace as 7 sisters hiding in plain sight in a dystopian society. If you get the chance or have enough free time on your hands, go ahead and check out any one of these films and see what you think. Now, before you ask the question, no, I did not get the opportunity to binge watch Marvel's The Defenders as of this recording. But I'll still use that as a clever segue anyway to our next category, which is shared universes and other comic book related shit, where we compile the latest superhero spectacles as well as other studio attempts at kickstarting new franchises based solely on the template that Marvel Studios recently perfected. Speaking of which, the MCU's 1-2 punch combo of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Spider-Man Homecoming were most certainly the biggest highlights of the summer, with a sequel that's every bit as good as the original and a reboot that finally gave some much needed justice to such an iconic character. And wouldn't you know it, even DC started to get their act together with the release of the first female superhero movie since, ever, Wonder Woman. And about damn time too, because I was just about ready to give up entirely on the DC Extended Universe after last year's double whammy of shit sandwiches. Now that they've made a more rewarding and less frustrating origin story than Man of Steel, I'm actually kinda looking forward to seeing the new Justice League movie in November. That is, if they could get their shit together by then. Now let's look at the other established universe, this time from the makers of the Conjuring franchise, Annabelle Creation, which is the prequel to that god-awful spin-off from a few years back that, much to my surprise, was actually pretty good. I don't know why that is, but I'm guessing it has something to do with the film's young actress, Lulu Wilson, who also served as a good luck charm for another surprisingly good prequel to a crappy horror flick. And of course, it was only a matter of time before we looked at the Dark Universe, which was pronounced dead almost immediately upon arrival with the release of their first movie, The Mummy. While Universal is still convinced that the rebooted take on their classic monster icons will happen, when we all know for a fact
it's not going to happen,
I think we could all agree that it would have been a slightly tolerable film if they decided to keep in Tom Cruise's bitch scream from the trailers. It never gets old. The last 2 films we're going to look at in this category are adaptations from both mine and filmmaker Luc Besson's personal youth. The one from mine, of course, is Captain Underpants, based on the beloved works by Dave Pilkey about 2 young pranksters who hypnotize their mean old principal into becoming the scantily clad title superhero. Which sounds a lot weirder now that I'm older. But whatever made those books such fun reads from the start, DreamWorks luckily retained with their clever writing and fast-paced animation. Now, as far as Luc Besson's 3D take on Pierre Christin's French graphic novels go, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets had all the makings of what could have been this generation's Fifth Element, with its gorgeous visual layout and intriguing world building. Unfortunately, the film found itself plagued with a number of setbacks, like bad dialogue, stale performances from both its main leads, and a premise that meanders for nearly 2.5 unnecessary hours. Therefore, it left me no other choice but to chalk this one up as one of this summer's biggest letdowns. Which brings us to our next category, MEH-sappointments, where we get to look back on the films that just couldn't live up to audiences' expectations, as well as the ones that, quite frankly, didn't leave much of an impact. So movies like 47 Meters Down, Hitman's Bodyguard, Kidnap, Snatched, and Wish Upon, I'm not going to waste any more time looking over due to how much they've all wasted mine. Now let's look at the ones that couldn't measure up, like the fact-based drama The Glass Castle, from the makers of the criminally underseen short term 12, and starring Brie Larson as a woman reminiscing on her unconventional childhood with her crazed alcoholic father, played by Woody Harrelson. While the performances are very good, I found the story quite difficult to be emotionally invested in due to how much they try to make light of Harrelson's troublesome character. I'm sure most people out there will not have the same opinion as me, but for all I know, this could be one of those cases where what worked as a book doesn't necessarily translate well as a movie. Kinda similar to how Ridley Scott's vision for the Alien franchise hasn't been faring well as it could've. With seemingly smart characters constantly making dumb decisions and plot twists you could see coming a mile away, it seems almost tragic that the man who started this series on such a high note would somewhat leave it hanging on a sour one. And since we're on the subject of franchises that have more than outstayed their welcome, movies like Despicable Me 3 and Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales have finally reached their breaking point with me. Which is a shame, because I used to love watching Captain Jack Sparrow and those weird looking Twinkies going on fun separate adventures. Now they feel like tired one-trick ponies starring in movies that either can't decide which storyline they want to focus on, or find one that doesn't recycle what came before. Hell, even Guy Ritchie's take on King Arthur felt tiresome, and that was supposed to be the first of 6 movies. I mean, I admire the ambition and all of doing a new radical spin on the Arthurian legends, but when you decide to throw in giant elephants, sea witches straight out of The Little Mermaid, and action set pieces that look like cutscenes from a video game, and somehow make it less plausible than Monty Python, then we definitely have a problem. But it could have been worse. They could have decided to put in Merlin and make him an alcoholic fraud who converses on a regular basis with a 3-headed dragon from outer space. More on that later. For now, let's move into our next category, Overlooked Surprises, where we look at a mixture of films that either flew under the radar or didn't receive enough credit. Sometimes this can be attributed to piss-poor marketing campaigns, prime examples being Sofia Coppola's remake of The Beguiled and Trey Edward Schultz's It Comes at Night. Both films, each oddly enough dealing with isolated families taking in questionable house guests, were advertised as straight-up splatterfest horror flicks, when in reality, they dealt more with either repressed sexuality or psychological paranoia. Not exactly the kind of stuff that would keep most audiences up through sleepless nights, but they're worth checking out regardless. But if it's horror you wish to find, then look no further than Kathryn Bigelow's gritty retelling of the 1960s Illinois riots in Detroit. Because no matter what absurd monster or serial killer franchise that Hollywood will try to push out, nothing will ever be quite as terrifying as what occurred in real life. It's one of the year's most extremely difficult and flat-out angering films to sit through, but still one of the most important. As for everything else in this category, good time was something I most certainly had watching Robert Pattinson finally shed away that dreaded Twilight glitter once and for all. The Hero was another easily enjoyable film, especially if you prefer your Sam Elliott's just as completely baked as the dude himself.
I take comfort in that.
There's also an inconvenient sequel, which now feels like one big fat I told you so response to every climate change denier given the most recent of events. Logan Lucky, which more people should have gone to see last month despite its overly generous Rotten Tomatoes score. Megan Levy, the only dog movie I've come across this year that I found remotely compelling. And lastly, the one film I was not expecting to like at all, let alone refer to it as the best entry in the series, Cars 3. Yes, you heard me right. I found this movie to be even better than the original. It did a surprisingly good job of telling a basic underdog story that kept me engaged, as well as preoccupied from asking any more disturbing existential questions regarding how this freak show of a reality works. Something the last movie failed at doing. It may not be the best animated film out there, but for a Cars sequel, this was mightily impressive. And now we finally arrive at our last category of the night, the best and worst films of the summer. For this one, we're going to do a little back and forth between what's on both lists. For example, I'll say what's number 5 on my worst list, then move on to my number 5 best pick, and so on and so forth. With that in mind, let's start things off with my number 5 worst pick, The Book of Henry. Now this one, I've finally come to grips with how much of a colossal train wreck it all is, albeit one of the more fascinating ones I've seen this year. It's one of those rare bad films you kinda have to see to believe, and the fact that it somehow led to its director, Colin Trevorrow, getting booted off the set of episode 9 should tell you something about it. On the flip side, The Big Sick takes up the number 5 best spot for being one of the most sincere and genuinely funny rom-coms we've gotten in a long while. Don't be too surprised if this one picks up a few writing and acting nods for this upcoming award season. Coming in at number 4 on my worst list is The Dark Tower, which severely disappointed diehard fans of Stephen King's epic fantasy novels and left newcomers like myself wondering why the folks over at Sony Pictures keep sabotaging their own film projects. But alas, the worst has yet to come out of that studio. Number 4 on my best list is Wind River, a powerfully gripping murder mystery set in the snowy plains of Wyoming from writer-director Taylor Sheridan, whose previous credits include Sicario and last summer's Hell or High Water. With only a handful of movies under his belt, Sheridan has already proven himself as a gifted storyteller, from the way he's able to acquire terrific performances from his entire cast, to how he manages to shed some light on the tragic situations that most Native Americans find themselves in without coming across as annoyingly preachy. My number 3 worst pick is the R-rated big screen reboot of one of the corniest television shows ever to showcase big bouncing boobs in slow motion, and really not much else, Baywatch. What easily could have been another really funny, clever spin on a nostalgic property like 21 Jump Street, sadly turned into an excruciating exercise of dick jokes and other forms of bad juvenile humor that not even the likable charms of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson could elevate.
What can I say except
I'm sorry. And my number 3 best pick is one you already know how much I love, War for the Planet of the Apes. I won't spend too much time talking about this, so I'll just leave off with saying how glad I am that we're still getting mainstream blockbusters that not only respect its own audience, but are still willing to take big risks. Which is the least I could say about my number 2 worst pick, The Emoji Movie, which is the other Sony property that more or less confirmed my suspicions that they are probably the most creatively bankrupt movie studio working today. Unless they have more talented folks like Kevin Feige and Edgar Wright to help them out, they really are nothing but a bunch of cokehead businessmen completely out of touch with nowadays moviegoers. I mean, how else would you explain their canceling of that very promising Popeye movie for this literal piece of shit?
we're number 2?
Now, I had a really tough time choosing between my last 2 choices in my best category, and there's a distinct possibility I might switch it up again by the time we reach the year's end. But for now, I'm placing director Christopher Nolan's riveting World War II drama Dunkirk in the number 2 spot. Anytime the man comes out with a film specifically formatted for IMAX cinemas, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a much richer, more immersive movie-going experience than any 3D project that James Cameron will spend the next few decades trying to develop. It also serves as a big f*** you to Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor in terms of properly honoring those who fought and died serving their country without resorting to using soap opera level movie cliches. And speaking of the old baster, I guess it should come as no surprise that his latest Transformers venture, The Last Knight, would be my go-to choice for biggest stank pile of the summer. A man can only endure the exact same carbon copy of a carbon copy of a carbon copy of a carbon copy for so long before going complete and utterly insane. Thankfully, I wasn't alone in feeling this way, as audiences worldwide are now starting to dart away from a franchise too dumb and incomprehensible to warrant 2.5-hour running times. If this line of protest keeps up, who knows? We might actually get a good Transformers movie someday. Or at the very least, one that actually features the original theme song for a change. Now, if Dunkirk was the movie that stimulated my mind, then my #1 best pick is what captivated my heart. And that's the reasoning why I ultimately went with Brigsby Bear. Chances are you probably have never heard of this one, as it came and went from most cinemas rather instantaneously. But it's one I really hope more and more people get the chance to discover down the line, because it is one of the sweetest, most heartfelt movies about movie making I've seen this year since The Disaster Artist, which, by the way, I also can't wait for you guys to see. Honestly, this movie affected me on such a deep personal level that at one point I couldn't help but burst into tears, which was the last thing I expected coming from a Lonely Island produced movie featuring a space traveling Teddy Ruxpin looking bear. It's charmingly funny, uniquely original, and one film this year I won't soon forget. And that was my 2017 summer movie recap. Now it's your turn. What were your favorite and least favorite films of the summer? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to keep up with more movie reviews in the near future. But until then, I'm the host, and thanks for watching. Angel Eyes, what are you doing here?
Review it.
Sorry, what?
Review it. Review it. Review it. Review it.